Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Julian Posada. Julian is the founder and president of LiftUp Enterprises, which is a for-profit holding company that focuses on both economic and social outcomes of their low-income employees. Prior, he was the COO of the Resurrection Project. He has also served on numerous nonprofit boards over his career and currently sits on the boards of the Chicago Public Media, BBB, Metropolitan Planning Council, Hope Chicago, Crains Forum Advisory Board, and Sprague Foundation. He is a active, engaged, thoughtful, very insightful, and also very practical business and social leader in the city of Chicago. And we get into the work that he is doing today at LiftUp to create profit while creating a good experience and dignity and stabilization for their low-wage employees. And I won't spoil too much of it here. We get really into the weeds. He kind of walks through some examples of how he takes things conceptually and puts them into practice and creates policy around them. And if you just even find one nugget to take out of this to implement in your business or your life or your process and how you engage with your team, whether that's your team at work or your team at home or your team at your nonprofit commitment or your local school, I think it could be really impactful for you. So excited to share this conversation. Here is Julian Posada. Julian, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on your second podcast ever. Somebody can fact check that, but I think that should be what it is. Yeah. And really interested in jumping into LiftUp Enterprises. You were starting to tell me even more about some of the new things that you're doing and thinking about. I love the way your brain works. I'm going to try to keep up here today, but really excited to just jump in because I think there's going to be a ton in here that if people just even take a nugget or two, it's going to be impactful. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. And again, pleasure and humbled to be here. It is my second podcast. So
let's start at the beginning. I know there's a lot we want to unpack, but let's start at the beginning. What is LiftUp and what's the origin story for LiftUp?
So LiftUp is a for-profit social enterprise whose mission is to accelerate the stability and the mobility of low-wage workers. And that we do that through a commercial cleaning, painting, landscaping, and graphics business, right? So low-wage workers, a little bit above minimum, right? High turnover industry, low barriers to entry, so anyone can do these kind of businesses. That's what we have today. We're about 5 years in, about 100 employees, but the real impetus of LiftUp came from frustration. I am a very privileged person that's been able to run several companies. I'm a serial entrepreneur from media to sports to philanthropy and a whole bunch of other things in the middle. Two depressing trends I kept seeing over and over, and I didn't understand why it's happening. And one was generational poverty. It's just getting more and more generations, right? So it's not one generation to get out. It's probably 2.5 generations to get out, right? The second trend that was more people are going into poverty, not your traditional, hey, listen, I'm low educated. It's like you might have an education, but you're still living paycheck to paycheck. Statistics in America are just horrible, right? Like no one has savings. People making $50,000 in a city like Chicago still living paycheck to paycheck. And then the last one was just the cyclical nature of if you become a low-wage worker, the probability that you will always be a low-wage worker, maybe 50 jobs as a low-wage worker is pretty high, right? You will always stay within the bucket of being a low-wage worker. So breaking through from low-wage to anything else is difficult. Shortening that generational poverty gap was very difficult to me, right? Why is that happening? And so with that context, I'm like, can somebody build a better mousetrap? I didn't think it would, there's hundreds of people working on this. I just thought this is my little way of doing it. So that's one side of it. It's all the data. And then where is capitalism fit in solving that problem? And so I came at it from a very cynical is not the right word, but I'm like, I said capitalism in general is broken for a low wage worker in America. Right? It's not working for that population. Right. And more we see the top one, you hear the top 1%, but if you go down to the bottom, capitalism doesn't work. And so when you look at the sheer volumes of people in that bracket, it has dramatic effects on society, right? Your hospital systems, your education systems, blah, 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 blah. And you have philanthropy trying to solve that, right? And so that was the origin. The origin was, how do I work at solving those problems? And people been going at it for generations and whatever. So I am one little tiny cog in the wheel.
Well, so let me pause you there, because I want to pick apart some of the stuff that you just said there. So for-profit social enterprise. And then you just said there's a bunch of nonprofits dealing with this. We've been trying to solve this problem forever. So what made you want to approach this from a for-profit standpoint versus a nonprofit standpoint?
Simple, right? It's personal. You know, I wanted to, could I create something that could do good and do well, right? Like I'm very privileged, right? Like I've had CEO jobs that pay me decent salaries. I have expenses for kids going to expensive colleges. I have all these other things. So I didn't see that my pathway personally, or going to run a large nonprofit where you get paid very, very well. I felt if I could figure out a way to do it in the for-profit space, could I be a model for others in the generations that are coming before me that have a high level of purpose, but they don't know how to use all their skills for good? So that was the impetus, was could I create a structure that allowed me to do good and do well? And people are doing it. I just, like, for my own personal, how do you do that? And how do you get ownership? How do you get points on the board? All those things that you're taught that really create generational wealth is you own a piece of the company and you do this and you do that. So that was the singular reason, was personal, which is why I'm motivated to keep doing it, because it helps me pay for my kids' college.
So do you get pushback from the nonprofit world?
Yes. I think that the nonprofit space sometimes will say, well, we're doing that work, right? And they are, by the way. I'm not saying, I think there's plenty of people doing it. The difference for me is, and when we get into it, Brian, is I keep looking at CEOs who run small to medium-sized businesses or even large businesses. And when we get into it, they're like, well, wait a second, I could use that. Like, that's stuff I can do to make even more money, right? And that's the part where, if you want to fix, we are in a capitalistic society. That's not going away anytime soon. And there is these talks of universal income, and I do think that has a way and a potential solution, but probably not in my lifetime are you going to get, with the fragmentation we have in our country, to get universal income. So in the absence of universal income is not coming anytime soon, capitalism for me has been able to drive major pieces of policy. And if we could figure out a way, a methodology, toolkits and whatever that allow people to say, I might be able to do that for myself, then can capitalism actually start to be supportive for a very distinct population in our society that's growing, but is not doing well?
Yeah. Yeah. So I love this. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because a number of years ago, I kind of got keyed into some organizations that are doing this kind of thing. And for the life of me, I need more caffeine this morning. Can't think of the one. There's one out of New York it's mainly doing it in other countries, but they're basically taking investment they're investing in for-profit startup founders in third world countries who, with a business plan and a goal of making lots of money. And these businesses are solving real local problems in a more cost-effective way, and they're returning profit to the fund. And so it's like almost like a private equity fund, but for-profit social enterprise. And so I just think, like, if we are going to solve these problems in a sustainable way, for-profit is sustainable, nonprofit is not. You know, you always have to go back to the well in nonprofit. Nonprofits do a great job as a support system, but if you want to fix the problem, you have to do it in the for-profit enterprise, because for-profits are the ones creating the problem in the first place.
Yes, and or government, right? So you need all three sectors to kind of figure out what their role is. And so for me, even looking at, some of the confidence factors of what people are doing, who do you have faith and confidence in, right? Is it nonprofits? Edelman's whole trust thing they just came out with, right? Where are we? Is it private sector? Is it government? Or is it the nonprofit sector? Where is their trust? Right now in the world, private sector has more level of confidence than government, given everything that's going on around the world. So in the United States, right, these things are happening, right? There is a vibrant yet small social impact, social enterprise funding is very difficult, right? It's hard, and the way our laws, banking, funding, all these other things are still there, but it's growing because of what you said. How do you incentivize someone to work at a problem that has potentially a double bottom line or triple bottom line, as people like to talk about it, to move it forward? So for me, it was, hey, this thing works. Julian and all of these employees will be fine, and my staff will be fine, and we're going to fix that, and you have upward mobility. But more importantly, you're mitigating the risk for others to try some of the things that I'm doing. Like for me, it's not, if it works for me, I don't want to keep it, which is counterintuitive, but like, I'd rather give it all away. Yeah. If I figure out something, go do it in your company, because I am never going to be a 1 million person employment organization. I'm never going to be Amazon. I'm never going to do that stuff. But if I can become R&D for stabilization of a low wage worker, I don't care. I'm good with that. I'm personally good with that. Some of my hardcore private equity friends are like, Julian, you're making so much enterprise value, you got to keep it on. I'm like, nah, I don't. I'm good.
Yeah. Well, that goes, if you've ever read Morgan Housel, his book, The Psychology of Money, one of the best chapters in there is the concept of knowing when enough is enough. He talks about, I think it was Heller who wrote Catch 22, and he had made something like $40 million over the, with that book. And he was at a party, and some titan of industry walked in and had done a private equity deal that had made $40 million that week. And the guy was bragging about it, and they were all talking, and he was laughing. I made as much this week as you made in your whole career. And the guy walked away, and somebody turned to Heller and said, hey, how does that make you feel? And he said, I feel fine, because I have something that guy will never have. I have enough.
It is incredibly well said. I already have enough, right? Like I'm doing this for the next generation, for the people that I see suffer all the time, for workers that I know aren't making it, right?
Yeah.
And for potential CEOs or executives that have at their disposal the ability to create policy around how to manage humans, low wage workers specifically. And so the more a CEO, an HR head can say, let me try that, for me, it's a win.
Yeah.
And that was what I appreciate about what you and your firm does, is that, like, how do you get people to test and iterate, and hopefully it'll work?
Yeah.
It may not. My instinct tells me if it's done in the right way, it'll work.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's move on and unpack what it means to stabilize an employee. Cause you had talked about that. And I know it was interesting when we were prepping for this, you had some interesting thoughts around stabilizing employees. Like, we're not talking about taking somebody from $15 an hour to making $1 million a year. What does it mean to you to stabilize a low wage worker?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, O'Brien. And I think this is where we have to, first of all, put our own biases aside of what is stability, right? Julian has a very privileged upbringing. Julian went to some fancy schools. Julian understands, like, hey, listen, what stabilization is for him is very different than what it is for other people. So we first have to, as best we can, compartmentalize what we think stability is and put ourselves in the other person's shoes. So for me, stability is somebody that has a strong social fabric. For me, stability is somebody that is not shocked when we live in the city of Chicago, who hits a pothole and they can't afford the $300 to fix the tire to get to work, right? Stability is someone that they're okay with where they are, and their aspiration to do something different. But that something different doesn't have to be owning a home. It could be taking a vacation. So stability for me has to come from the mind of that person, what they believe is first. And so that makes it more difficult, but actually easier to create the things we're trying to do. So that's one. And then mobility is the second piece, O'Brien. Like, that you have the ability to figure out a way to navigate your life, meaning, can I get to and from work in a decent amount of time? And that can be public transportation. It could be a bike. It could be a car. It could be, I don't care. Right. But that you have the wherewithal to get up and move to a better place. Right. I'm in a bad neighborhood, in a bad home. And so mobility allows me, well, like, I have young kids. I want to move to a different neighborhood. So stability and mobility for me are the basis of how we can get, again, this is the population that has making very little, living paycheck to paycheck, has no savings, does not have probably some of the more formal education that you and I have and other folks. It's really that destitute poor right above that. But you made it a very good point that I want to emphasize. Yeah, I'm not here to tell you that I'm going to get a janitor or one of our cleaners to then be the CEO. What I'm saying is I'm going to get a cleaner to have more time to think about what it is, to have more advocacy for themselves, to have time in the brain, we'll get to, right, that allows them to start thinking about what stability is, and then potentially put them on a pathway where they're more stable. But that more stability might not be wage, right? We have plenty of workers that don't want to trip up Social Security. They just want to work 7 hours a week and they're happy. So it's not about, I got to get full-time work, or I got to get you from $15 to $28 an hour. For some, yes. For some, no. And so that's where stepping back and looking at it from a much higher level of what is going on in the brain of that person to get them to be stable is where I start from.
Can you just expand on that last point a little bit more? Because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. You had said in our prep, more money does not solve the problem necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, it helps, always helps, right? Don't get me wrong. But I think.
Yeah, that's not an excuse not to pay your people a fair wage.
Right. Or that you do need money to pay rent so you have a home, house, roof over your head. So when you dig into this poverty mindset that everyone talks about very freely, it's pretty painful to live in a poverty mindset, right? And a poverty mindset is just this unrelenting pressure on a low wage worker to just get by, right? That when you live paycheck to paycheck, the cognitive stress on the brain is so high and you make bad decisions, right? We all know about predatory lending. Well, they know that. And so they capitalize on the fact that you're making bad decisions because your brain is so focused on who do I got to pay? Do I eat? Do I pay rent? What do I do? How do I do it? Right? That consumes you. And that pressure on the cognitive load is so great that it's very hard to get another job. It's very hard to excel in your current job if you're worried about, I have my next job I have to go to. So I'll land the plane a little bit for our people. 50% of the people that work for me have 2 jobs. Some have 3, and we even found one that has 4 jobs, right? Like that's crazy, right? I still am crazy optimist that you should be able to work 40 hours a week in the great United States of America and have something, not a white picket fence, but something. I still have that vision that you should be able to live in this country, work 40 hours a week and have something.
Yep.
And that's not happening, right? It's not
I think that's fair. Yeah. That sounds fair to me.
And so that brain, right, is something that kept starting to ask questions, right? And I know you laughed because I think I made you chuckle when what one professor said to me is like, Julian, it is amazing how you're leveraging neuroscience to reduce the cognitive load in the working poor. And my simple answer to him was, you mean just being nice and using grace? What we're trying to figure out is how can we create a set of tools, or what I call a dignity-based management principles, that allow you to create more slack or space in that brain to create better decisions, right? Yeah. Even if you're living paycheck to paycheck. How do you create more time for a low wage worker to be a better parent? Nothing to do with how do you clean or how you use landscaping. How do we create more time in that brain so that you don't make a bad decision on something financial, and or that you create more time and or slack in the brain where you can actually have a conversation about financial wellness or something different that going back to stability allows you to do that. And I think employers have an amazing opportunity to take that principle and drive humanely easy, not hard to do. You got to execute. So I'm a pretty good executor, right? You got to be able to execute properly, but they're not as difficult as I think people think they are. And so one of the visions for me is like, how do you demystify it? So if I could do this stuff in a cleaning and landscaping company, right, which for me is like almost a gig economy, right? Because I have workers that go work all these other places. I don't have a cafeteria. I don't have a centralized place. Schedules are all over the place. Yet we're building a discipline, a way of operating that over time, what do we hope to have? I'm your first choice of your 4 jobs or your 3 jobs. I'm the shift you don't want to miss. That is a massive win. I think that could calibrate your audience. Like I'm not pretending that you're not going to have 2 jobs. I'm going to say you are going to have 2 jobs, but the one you're never going to miss is mine, because we're treating you with a dignified way to do it. So people that have factories, they have the second shift, the third shift. I just want to make sure that you don't miss mine.
Yeah.
And the way we operate, in my opinion, in the long run, you will have a competitive advantage to your competitors because you're starting to think like this. And that for me is worthwhile for an HR professional or a CEO to say, yeah, I want that.
Yeah. So we'll come back to dignity-based management because I got a lot of questions there. But I want to dive into this other piece of this too, because I think this could be helpful for people who are listening, who are like, this sounds great. And then they go on their daily lives and they don't know how to execute this. You seem to have an uncanny ability to process call it academic, like research principles, and then simplify them down into tactical execution. Like you're talking about the neuroscientists and like you understand neuroscience and brain chemistry and cognitive load and what that does on a human being and like all this theoretical stuff.
Yeah.
And then you're also able to go, oh, you mean we treat people well and they feel good? And like, here's how and then here's the 2 or 3 things that we do to implement at the, employee level that change that behavior. So like, how did you build that skill set? I think that could be really helpful for people because people hear theory and they don't know how to apply it, or they're applying and they don't know how to bring in the theory. Like I think people have trouble connecting those dots in a way that seems very natural to you.
Yeah, I think from a lot of failure,
how all good lessons are learned.
Yeah, exactly. No, Brian, it's a good point, right? I think that for me, it's been, what does your intuition tell you? I'm very blessed that I have parents that raised me in the right way of like what's right and what's wrong. And so what's right and what's wrong, but then how do I apply it? Yeah. And you're right. I got these fancy, I went to Kellogg and blah, blah, blah. But I do believe we said something in before, it's about leadership, right? And it's about what's right. It's hard for me not to do every day what's I think is right. And so my drive is, it's just not right if you treat someone poorly. And so if every day the people my client is not just the person who I'm doing landscaping services for, my client is my employee, right? Because I am very privileged. So, and a lot of the stuff I talk about cognitive load, whatever, in my opinion, most people know it intellectually, right? Like I'm not saying anything. People get stressed out before they take an exam. CFOs get stressed out before they close the books. Okay, well, when you do that, you're doing the same thing that someone who is poor does. They just do it every single day because that burden is so high. But you're a CEO or you're a CFO, you're closing the books. What do you do after you close the books? You probably get the chance to relax. Like, oh, got done with that close, now I got to do the next one. You're an HR person and you got to do 100 reviews. Once the reviews are done, guess what? You get to take a break. Someone who's poor doesn't get to take a break because they got to worry about the rent next week or the bill next week, right? So
yeah,
I think that how I've figured out a way to, what is the solution is that it's a recognition and an awareness that someone else is suffering. And so it's an extension of empathy, if you want to call it. I'm not someone that likes to hear about the problems all the time without working on the solutions, right? And so I don't want to wake up every day and say, oh, woe is me because I'm going to have someone quit on me today. It's like, no, I got to work harder to make sure they don't quit. And that effort to take these concepts, which, by the way, I don't think any of your listeners are going to say, oh yeah, Julian just talking. It is common sense. I just figured out a way to say, I've gone backwards to understand the origin, the science, right? I'm blessed to know a little bit of the math. Okay, well, how much is this going to cost me? Because I still got to run a very low margin business, right? And then the most important thing is I really work hard to have the will. I am just relentless to have the will as a leader that this is the work.
Yeah.
Work is not just gouging, just to make money. It is to make money, but also feeling good when I can go home and sleep.
How do you hold the time for this kind of iteration and experimentation? Because I was talking with somebody last night about this. The world, it seems, has just been cranked up. If it's like listening to an audio book where you can listen to it at 1.5 times speed or 2 times speed. It just feels like somebody hit 1.5 times or 2 times on the world, and we're just all running. There's more to do. There's kids, there's work, there's like everything. But so many people that I talk to on the podcast, like in order to be effective, we have to be able to slow down and hold time to either think or do deep work or experiment or practice. How do you, it sounds like you're a very busy person yourself. How do you hold that time, and how do you encourage the people within your business to hold that time?
I think for me, it is a very good point, O'Brien. I'm very busy, with the boards I sit on and all the other work, and just even the concept of what we're trying to figure out. But I think that in that speed, in that acceleration of a life that we live, you're actually been given a gift to try to fail faster. Like, no one's going to hold you. I think sometimes, like, oh my God, you know what? You're trying to, I look at it like fail fast and fail often, right? Like, I look at the software development, like, hey, you got to test and iterate, fail fast. The fail fast mentality for me is you've been given a gift. The fact that everyone's moving at 100 miles an hour, you can try and fail quick. Everything that I'm doing is not about this grandiose 10-year vision plan. It is like, hey, let's try that for 3 quarters. And so you're setting up a mindset of like, there's probably 10 goals and objectives for that initiative. Let's just take 2. And if 2 of them roughly work, then let's add the other ones. And so I spend the time to calibrate, yes, in my mind, the big vision, but then it's like, can I get my HR generalist to read this document? And I'll highlight pieces, and then we'll come back. That for me is the mindset, right? Like, I give her articles on stuff. She's like, oh my God, my boss is going to kill me. He's making me read something about the correlation between parenting and your job satisfaction. It's like, what does that have to do with me scheduling 3 cleaners who just called off? So, very high theory. I will highlight the sections and say, hey, listen, in our next one-on-one, just tell me what you thought about that paragraph. That is a micro change in the way behavior happens. So yes, as a CEO, yes, I will consume all of it. But for my staff who is running ragged, who doesn't have the time, who doesn't, like, they think I'm crazy, but they will take that one paragraph. And my job as the leader is saying, how do I bring you along? I've already read the whole article. I kind of know I've read the book, done it, but now I have people, because it's all about execution, right? I don't have a fancy HR department. I got we're grinding it out every day. But she read the paragraph. She's like, oh, that makes sense to me. So take that one, for example. There is a direct correlation between early childhood development and a parent and their satisfaction at work. It's coming out everywhere. Okay. That parent is my employee.
Yeah.
That parent is my employee. How does scheduling affect that parent? Because we want that parent to be happy. Because if the parent is happy, we all know I get higher job satisfaction. They're probably not going to quit. Blah, 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 blah. Okay.
Yeah. More stability at home. Kids get better education. Kids have better future. Yeah.
And Halloween is coming, right? We're in the middle. Hey, what can we know this is a problem. We know Halloween is coming. We know that scheduling is important. What can we think about now? Oh, why don't we ask people earlier if they're going to go trick-or-treating with their kids? I didn't come up with that. An HR person who, that's important. We all, we're in command and out of control, right? I stole that from Malcolm Gladwell, right? He says this all the time, listen, we got to be in command, but out of control. That in command it is important for the well-being of my employee. Why? Because my HR person does not want to have to worry about someone not coming to a shift. That makes her life worse. And we need my HR person, not have a worse life because she's running around scheduling. We need my employee to be happy. So bringing that, and I don't know where that could go, right, O'Brien? I don't know, but hey, I'm bringing you something. You're in charge of 100 employees trying to make sure they get to work every day.
Yeah.
Where does that go next? Hey, let's have a policy around, or let's ask our employees, are there any other bigger milestones coming up for you as an employee? Well, graduations. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at scheduling around graduations. Is it hard? That's grace. That's dignity-based management principle.
Yeah.
I just did it. Is that hard? Do you have to call it dignity-based management principles? The reason I do say that is because it shocks someone
Yeah.
So we just did on this podcast a way that I took something very high level, landed it, told someone who was stressed out, my HR generalist. We had time and iterated in a one-on-one. And now how do we make that policy?
Yeah.
It may work.
That's a great
It may not.
example.
It may work, it may not. But the mindset of my HR person is, yeah, that parenting. And by the way, she's a single parent.
Yeah.
So
she gets it.
She gets it.
Well, I just want to highlight one of the things you did there. And it's funny because I'm actually working with my personal coach on this for me in my sort of evolution of leadership too. And I love the example that you just gave is so often we either expect the people on our team to think and have the vision that we have, and then we get frustrated when they don't, or we send them the whole article and then they are like, I don't know what to do with this. And then we get frustrated at them for that. And then we view them as incapable or incompetent, or they're just not on board or whatever. You know, it's their problem. It's not our problem. But I think I love the ownership that you took of your team's development to bring them along with you, to say, I don't expect you to have the time or the vision for any of this, but I'm going to give you this nugget. And then I'm going to make you think about that nugget. And we're just going to focus on this little piece. And I'm just going to bring you along just one step at a time. I'm just going to bring you along this journey with me. And I think that compounded over time is how any organization transforms themselves.
Yeah, I think you build culture, right?
Yeah.
My HR generalist understands that when I put her next to another HR generalist from a cleaning, landscaping, or low wage worker, high turnover business, it will maybe come out how many more concepts she's operating at a much higher level. She just doesn't know it. Yeah. Because you're right. My job is to, how do you do that? And what will happen, by the way, out of every 5 articles you send them and you only highlight one section, every once in a while, they'll read the whole article. You're not asking them to, but you're creating curiosity back to being, in command and out of control, right? Like, yeah. My employee I'm being hired to keep employees working.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that what you just said there is a question so many people ask. How do we create curiosity and drive in our people? And I think that is a great example of how you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So you hopped the tracks back onto dignity-based management, which is great. So let's move the train there.
Yeah.
What are some of the other principles of dignity-based management?
Look, I think it starts with that recognition that there are the haves and have-nots, and the have-nots, it's not really the have-not. It's just we have to figure out a way for them to get there. So when you look at the word grace, it's like, how do you behave with grace? Right. And so how are you more sensitive? So looking at, I think I helped a CEO with this one, which was, he was having a hard time, people not going to work on time. He runs a factory, big printing press. And I said, okay, does your HR department, which the answer was no. When's the last time your HR department took the zip codes of your employees and just went on Waze and looked at how long it took to get there? Because their commute was 6 minutes. Their average employee going to their factory was an hour, right? So grace for me would be, if you had a 1 hour commute, what would you want to have grace to get to work on time if there was an accident on the highway? Is it 2 minutes before you dock their pay? Is it 10? Is it 15? What? You make that assessment if it was you. How would you want to be treated? And I will tell you, I've done this 2 or 3 times, and there is a dead silence by those HR and the CEO. Like, I didn't think about it that way. You're right, because you're sitting in probably a plush car. Your commute time's not that bad. No one's going to fire you, right? Because you are salaried. Yeah. But put yourself in their shoes. Then what would you want if that was you? Or go back to a date and time when you were hourly. How do you feel you were treated? And you're doing it. That worker's probably doing everything they can. There are some don't get me wrong, I fire people all the time. But in general, and by the way, those become very interesting pieces of policy discussion.
Yeah.
That's a lunch and learn. Let's all remember when we were hourly workers and we were going to get dock pay. What was that level of fault before you get docked your pay or don't even come to work? So I think that's just one example of like, okay, that's what I think a dignity-based management principle, that conversation, can have a breakfast, lunch with the CEO, whatever, is you're talking about dignity.
Yeah.
Another thing to remember, for a low wage worker, they spend so much time at work that it is a core part of them being a human on our planet. Like it's a super high level, but having purpose, if you work 3 jobs, that has become very important to you. So when you see, oh my God, they're spending so much time, the little attention to detail, because that is their sense of purpose. Their work is it. For someone who has a lot of money, their sense of purpose might not be that, right? For someone who has a lot of education, it's very different what your sense of purpose is. But when you're spending 50, 60 hours a week, barely making it paycheck to paycheck, or you have to take care of an elderly person, you're only going to work 20 hours. Those 20 hours become very valuable psychologically. So dignity for them is very important, right? I'm sure plenty of people on your podcast have people who are, these are the cards I was dealt. I'm just going to come in and do my job. That is a gift that you have been given as an HR executive or as an employee. That I have someone that, yes, is only making $18 an hour, $17 an hour, and is coming in to do their job good. And what I say is, don't take that for granted, and don't underestimate how much power you have to continue that, because we all want a good employee. So a dignity-based management is asking yourself that question all the time. What would be a dignified response for time off? What would be a dignified response for policy for being late?
Yeah.
What would be dignified policy for someone that has to go to the doctor during your shift because they're a single parent and in their mind, they don't have health care and they're trying to figure this out? What would you do? Is it a little bit more taxing on the HR person or the CEO? Yeah, I'm not saying no, but all the data shows lower turnover, higher work retention. Going back to my original goal, I want to be the shift that you don't want to miss. How much is that worth over time to create a competitive advantage? I think it will be one, right? And that's my bet. My bet is there will always be bad players, O'Brien, always. I come at it that we all have the opportunity to do good. We all do. There's not a single person who's going to listen to this that doesn't have the capacity, the power to do good, even if it's micro. So I'm betting on there are going to be people that will never do it, but the people that will have a competitive advantage because they will attract a population that is ginormous and growing in the United States. We're not talking about onesies and twosies. We're talking about hundreds of thousands. Pick the state, pick the industry. Low wage workers are here to stay. AI is not going to recline everything. And by the way, you don't want AI to recline everything because the cost of the healthcare system, all these other things are going to exacerbate if you don't put someone to do something.
Yeah. Human beings need purpose and projects.
Yep. So that allows me to stop and say, okay, well, how do you do that? Right. And where are the applications? So people are like, oh, you're doing landscaping, cleaning. Like, don't worry about that. There's probably better applications for what I'm doing if you're working at co-packing plants, distribution centers, trucking companies, blah, blah, blah. All these places that really have a low wage worker as part of that essential building block for those companies. Manufacturing, light manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, pick it, right? Doesn't really matter. It's still a low wage worker that has a mindset that's being taxed, overtaxed.
Yeah.
Stress.
So you mentioned that it is a little bit of an increased administrative load.
Yeah.
What about the financial ROI of this? I know you like, hey, it's a competitive advantage. We get like turnover goes down. There's some money there. The stuff that you're talking about, does it require major financial investments from you as a business leader? Or, and if so, like, how do you offset that? Or how do you look at the ROI of that? Or is it, it's really just behavior change and there really isn't much cost?
So we're early in the process, but I will tell you, I'll give you one example where the ROI is very good, right? One thing that comes in, it is very common with someone who's poor, is if they have a shock to the system. A shock could be, hey, I had a death in the family and I don't have money to cover funeral costs, right? I hit a pothole. I don't have the $300 to do that, right? So these shocks could be devastating, right? Oh, I don't have money. So the alternative right now is let me go to payday loans or get a cash advance, right? And now I'm stuck with 33% interest, or a lot of times they borrow from friends and family, right? So this short liquidity gap could potentially be brutal for a low wage worker. Very common. A company sponsored employee loan. The mechanics are very easy. It's less than a page. We have one. And I'll get to the P&L. So I said, listen, we don't have money for that stuff. But what we do have is a certain amount of money. So the HR person and I said, okay, I'm going to give you $4,000 as your line at $4,000, right? We run a $4 million company with 100 employees. So if I'm a really bad CEO, if I can't carve out $4,000 of a $4 million business, right? It's not going to affect my margin in any material way. So she has a floating $4,000. What does that $4,000 do? Our company sponsored employee is super simple. She can lend any employee, no questions asked. I don't even ask. Someone comes to you and they have a shock, right? Well, you can lend them up to $400. You charge them 10% interest one time. And that employee tells you when they're going to pay you back. So we have direct deposit, whatever. So, hey, listen, I can't pay you back for a month, but then after that, I'll pay you $25 a month, right? Or, hey, listen, I just need it for this week. Take it out of my next week paycheck, or whatever, however they want to do it. You're giving them back agency, right? So the company, $400 out of its savings or what our checking account, and gave it to that employee. That $400 to that employee does so much, not only mentally, but gets them out of the problem, that immediate shock. And then you're also teaching behavior about paying it back, right? So I tell my HR person, you have the ability only to give out 10 loans at a time. That's it, $4,000. Okay, we've been doing this now for 5 years, right? Our payback rate is 98%. We had one person that didn't pay it back. She paid 200 of the 400, and then she had to go back to Mexico because she had a family emergency. So it wasn't that she didn't want to pay, it's that she had a massive thing and she had to leave this country and go back, right? But 98% payback.
Yeah.
He's never gotten even close to the 10, right? I've gotten all my money back, plus interest income that is our snacks we use for our snacks, right? So it's not like I'm gouging my employee. It's $40, right? So that pays for whatever we want. So I have interest income, right? But that tool allows that HR person to have a lot of discretion to promote and say, listen, before you do anything stupid, I'll give you the $400. And we're allowed that employee to take 2 of those loans out. If they need a third, we make them go meet with a financial coach. We work with a nonprofit and say, listen, you got a problem managing money. I'm not going to give you a third loan until you go meet with this agency that we've set aside and we work with, right? And that, O'Brien, allows you to say, listen, I'm giving you agency. I'm here, but I'm not all the way here. Like, you can't keep going back well if you have perpetual problems. But
there's standards and guardrails.
But how much does that cost me? I have 100 employees. We've never got to 9, ever, right? Now, we know some people are going through the cracks, don't get me wrong, but the people that really need it, and more importantly, I gave a tool to my HR generalist that allows her to do what? Make sure that employee potentially keep coming to work, right? 2, agency. And what's the bar? $4,000?
Yeah.
And so that's the way I've modeled it through, right? So we have a first and last month's rent benefit. The same, I'm very privileged. So in some of my other companies, I was the top 1%, right? So Julian, we're going to give you access to the golf course and this and that. We're going to pay you tuition, whatever you want to do, right? That's fine. That doesn't exist for this low wage worker. So the future for me, O'Brien, and maybe some podcasts in a year from now, is I want to reinvent fringe benefits for the low wage worker. Because they just don't, in my opinion, what I see, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So first and last month's rent, like that one's a little more expensive. That might cost me $7,000. And the simplest is like, people don't have money for a down payment or for first and last months to move out of a bad neighborhood. So why don't I do something like it happened to me at the top of the food chain, which is, Julian, we're going to reimburse you for your tuition, right? Because we want you to go some more fancy degrees. And I'm like, yeah, fine. What about, hey, you're a great person. Do you have a housing problem? I will fund as a company your first and last months of your rent. You stay with us for 2 years or whatever that time period is, and we'll forgive it for you. I've modeled that out. And by the way, that ROI is really high. For $3,000, that is a lifer. That allows that person to come to work in a different mindset. Because when people come to work, you and I probably, I mean, I'm very comfortable by the time I get to work. I have people that lived like, well, you had a very challenging morning, but think of that challenging morning every single day.
Yeah.
So how do I reduce the stress? So a person that just got a promotion or one of my full performers has more agency in their brain to think about what we need them to do. Housing is important. So why don't I help with that?
moving to a better neighborhood, moving closer to work, shorter commute times, closer to a better school system for your kids. Yeah, all kinds of stuff.
And I might do that for 1 or 2 employees only, right? So your point about what's the cost, I am sure people on your podcast have a much more sophisticated way of saying, what is our investment per employee? What I would tell you is talking about 9 or 10 CEOs, this already happens. What is our cost per employee we want to invest in an employee? So pick the number. Take that same budget. What I'm saying is it really allocated the right way?
Yeah.
Right? Are you giving the bonuses in the right way? What really works for them? And those are the other things that we probably don't have time in the podcast is what incentivizes the brain, like waiting 1 whole year for some potential for whatever. We're like, listen, this person doesn't understand what's going to happen in 3 weeks. So how do we accelerate recognition, cash, benefits to somebody who's living on a paycheck to paycheck? So that's where our future is going. And we spend a lot of time just listening to our employee.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad you said that because that was the next question that was coming. So you're doing these things. Is it Julian being so insightful? How are you coming up with these ideas? Because I think I'm guessing there's some wisdom here.
Yeah. No. I ask questions of the HR people like, why didn't someone come to work? They have all the lists, right? Like this happened, that happened, that happened. And so I just ask my HR generalist. I don't talk to the employee. They're like, my staff, like, Julian, you can't talk to them. You're going to drive me crazy. Like, no.
You're going to give away the house. Let us do it.
Stay out of let me talk to the employee. But I asked the HR person, what happened this week? Who didn't come to work and why? And that why starts to percolate the answer. And then the other side is what you said earlier. I spend a lot of time with people in philanthropy or people working on the problem. So you have an academic, like, transportation costs, right? And or commute times are increasing. We know that because that's the academic side, data. And then if you hear it from the other side, they couldn't get the buses or they canceled the bus for that route. So it's marrying both of them to say, what do we do about that?
Yeah.
So we know the macro problem. And then I hear it on the micro level. So food insecurity is another big issue. Like no one is telling you they're too pride.
Yeah.
But the run of people right now, and God forbid, which is happening very soon, all that COVID relief money goes away. The sheer volume of human beings who will not have food that keeps me up at night. I heard this from the CEO of the Greater Food Depository. She's like, Julian, the probability that your worker is going to work hungry is over 90%. Oh. And food suppression for them is that big, the big Dunkin' Donuts. That's food suppression. Yeah. I'm fine. I'm going to eat this. And they might eat a snack here or there, but they're loading up with carbohydrates, right? And moving down. So as a company, I have a call in 2 weeks about how can we figure out a way to ease food insecurity for a low wage worker? And is that a benefit, right? Is that something we give as part of your promotions? Is that something where right now we already do this with our nonprofit partner? We probably have about 100 people that we have connected with food pantry in a dignified way. We don't say, hey, listen, we know you don't have food.
Yeah.
But we do it in a way where like, we just recognize like, this is probably happening. So how do we do that? I don't get any credit for it. I don't want any credit for it. I want them to feel they have dignity in the way they're operating their lives, but I'm recognizing the problem in a very quiet, subtle way that allows them to still feel like, hey, I don't want my employer to know that I don't have food.
Yeah. It's not Julian the savior.
Yeah, I don't, absolutely not. That's a very good point about it. I don't want any of that. I want to say, hey, listen, they sent me over to this place and then we create that connectivity.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to think of my employers doing it. I just said, like, we're just kind of recognizing you got this issue. Like, how to figure it out.
I was listening to a podcast episode of The Knowledge Project, which is a great show. And he was interviewing a friend who runs a private equity firm, and they have a lot of investment principles around dignity and treating people well. The gentleman, the guest, was telling a story about how he used to always pay for meals when he went out with friends, and he would go out of his way to pay for these meals. And he was working with a therapist at one point, and the therapist said something like, I bet you're paying for all the meals. He said, yeah, all the time. And she pointed out that he was actually doing damage to the relationship. And he was like, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, every time you go out and you pay, now you're taking a little bit of dignity away from somebody else. If they want you to pay or they're willing for you to pay, that's great. And he has now changed it to, hey, it would bring me a lot of joy if I could pay for this meal for you. But if not, that's totally fine. We can split it, or you're welcome to pay. And he will say that now. And he said probably 60, 70% of the time, people will be like, no, that'd be great. I'd like really appreciate that. If it makes you feel good, that's fine. But about 40% of the time, people are like, no, I'm going to pay, or we're going to split it. And he says, okay, that's great. And he realized that like going in and doing the big thing and making the big gesture actually erodes real relationships with people if you do it too much.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better. We try to do that. Like when we do company picnics or little things like that, we want to make sure people have the way of them bringing themselves to that experience that they have with us. I tell my staff, I'm like, we're privileged that they work for us.
Yeah.
These are people that are, trying to do the best they can with what they got. And, don't take that for granted, but also allow them to show up how they want to show up, right? You can't do everything. And that's hard, right? Because you have more, but even people that have a little, let them have that dignity, and it goes a long way.
Yeah.
Right? It does go a long way. And so we find other ways of doing it without letting them know we do it, like this paid thing. Like we just don't really, but we're behind it.
Yeah.
But we want it to be their ideas, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not here to amplify, like you said, we are all this. No, we just recognize where you are. We're going to try to nudge you, which is another big neuroscience concept, which is the nudging effect, right? How do you nudge people into doing different behavior? You're going to be doing it with your kids all day long. You nudge all the time. It's please and thank you. You'd say please and thank you, right? That's nudging. That's just rewiring the brain to be able to do a behavior that you want them to do. Dieting, exercise, please and thank you, manners. The brain keeps taking these inputs in and is very good at filtering out, but the consistent squeaky wheel is what you get. So how do you do that? How do I do nudging in a company? What's that behavior we want? I'll be honest, a nudging effect for us, learning how for a low wage worker to take time off. Okay. I mean, simple, but I'm sure people on your podcast, oh my God, I've put it in the employee handbook. I've done this. I've done that. I don't understand why they can't take time off. If your mind is super stressed out, you will read that thing 50 times and more 3 words. And if your employee handbook has words that have 5 syllables in it, please understand the population that you're working with.
Yeah.
So you gotta.
Oh, this is something I wanted to ask you too, because you mentioned that a lot of your population is actually English illiterate.
Yes.
So can you talk about how you're using other communication forms to reach people?
Yeah, I'll put a plug in for them and to text them all. I mean, if people haven't heard of that SMS platform, they do a lot of work with Amazon, but we were one of my advisors who knows the CEO at Textimo was like, Julian, you got to start finding a better way to use SMS and figuring out. And so what we've coupled is a texting platform in addition to a neuroscience behavioral, like what words to use, the trigger, right? So this is where we're mending text.
But is it all text or are you doing video? Like how are you reaching people who...
Text is right now with images, right? And short, like it is short. It's not that expensive. Like it's pretty cheap. And so but it's what words. Like the thing is that what we're getting into now, the next iteration, O'Brien, is what are words that actually resonate with someone who's very stressed out? How do you actually market to a text rate? That's where we're going, right? Where we're going is, okay, every word counts. You can't just say to take time off, click this link and fill out the form. It's like more like going somewhere, ? Click the link. Same thing.
It's copywriting.
It's copywriting, but understanding the person's getting that SMS message. So what is that? Where we're going is, you and I joked, and this is for next quarter, is TikTok videos. I want to be able to go to a place where you're doing short, funny videos about how to take time off, right? Like, what is PTO? Your paycheck. What is on your pay stub? how do we have humor and or videos that explain it? Right? It's just not going to happen no matter how many times you do. We have a pretty robust onboarding process for a low wage worker, probably way too much, but my HR people, they just don't read. And so we calm the stress of my HR person using Text Them All Now and some of these other, but the vision, O'Brien, is that what we're seeing. Where did I go? I went to, if you go to pharmaceuticals, right? How do you get someone to take their medication? Like, we went to places like, someone has this problem. Here's the truth. Someone is getting paid. It's true. There's a healthcare company in California that only gets paid when the patient takes the medication. So there is a financial incentive to make sure someone takes their medication.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I forgot the name of the company, but like when I started looking at some of the critics, it was like 3 years ago, I'm like, damn, that's brilliant. So the ad agency, the head of marketing, the CFO, the COO, they're like, listen, we need conversion. And conversion was take the insulin, I don't know what the drug was. Okay. Highly stressed out brain, whatever, but you don't get cash until that person takes a medication. Right. So here is someone who's taken the patient, right? Or for me, that high burden cognitive load worker, and figured out a way to make money. But I'm trying to take those principles, say, okay, I have an HR person stressed out because no one knows how to take PTO off. How do I use those same lessons, but for basics? And then if I can codify that, then hey, O'Brien, you have a factory that's got 32,000 employees. Try this. Because we're piloting it, so to speak, in what we're doing. And I think that's if you step all the way back, right? I think part of the vision that I have for this whole thing is that we become R&D. I want to be able to have people like you come and say, listen, I heard this problem. You have an itch. Can I scratch it with all the things we're doing and then give it back to you? Right? Because the problem is much bigger than me in a little, idea in the city of Chicago with low wage workers. This is a massive problem across the United States. This is not just
it's around across the world. I mean, I've interviewed a gentleman on here who runs a center at UC San Diego, working in India and other third world countries, doing the same kind of research and figuring out that the same kind of dignity-based leadership works there as well as it is working in your organization. So
that's good to know.
Yeah. I'll connect you with Ach, who runs that. He was a great episode, and he's doing some really impactful work. All right. So I had cut you off when we started, and I want to make sure we get back to this. Before we had hit record, you were talking about smile bonuses.
Oh God. Yes. Back to science, right? So everyone knows that, that's not true. It is common knowledge, if you read medical journals or know stuff, that when you smile, you elicit a different chemical reaction in the brain, right? So
pre-COVID can actually change your mood.
There you go. See, someone that actually read that stuff.
Yeah.
So I just was looking at it, it's like, oh my God, I have people that are unseen. I have frontline workers. Usually landscapers are not looked at. They're like, oh yeah, that's person mowing my lawn, or that's person doing that, digging that trench. And then, frontline custodial workers aren't really looked at as people a lot of times. So they're just really invisible. So I had that going for me pre-COVID, before you could put a mask on, right? And I'm like, damn, gotta be depressing. Like, no one sees you. Your work isn't valued. So how do we value? And so I went to my staff, and we're working through kinks on how to implement it more formally, because it does take an awareness of the supervisors and the other one. So I just said, listen, how do we combine random acts of kindness and saying thank you? And so I came up with this thing, and my staff started laughing, but I said, you're laughing and you're smiling as we talk about it. So the smiling bonus was a very simple way of saying, hey, if we can figure out a way where we see one of our employees just doing something nice. And I'll give you one example. We had a cleaning lady who would open the door. She cleaned at a senior center. She just opened the door for another resident. And when she did that, she smiled, right? That was her tiny, tiny way. So I would tell my supervisor, give her $20. Just give her $20. Right. And so it became, calling it the smiling bonus. 3 things are happening from an HR executive perspective, or CM, chief, is I'm creating awareness in my supervisor to be understanding where my employees are at or not at. 1.
Yeah.
2, it is a small dollar amount that is not going to kill my books, right? I got 100 people. So you just say, listen, we're going to give away $1,000 a month, right? It's not for everybody. It's not all the time, but it's discretionary and not a lot of money. It's like, and maybe we put it as a gift. I think we give it as like Dunkin' Donut gift cards, right? Or whatever. Like we had people do. I challenged my HR staff to say, it's important for the supervisors to give it. So if you don't, that means you're not really aware. You're going through your maintenance. So how do you create awareness in the supervisor person doing it?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing beyond awareness is you're priming them to look for the good in their employees, which is huge.
There you go. That's even better. I don't even think I wrote that down. That was good. Thanks, Brian. And so over time, you're also recognizing someone for something that's not about, did you clean the surface faster? Like, I'm thanking you for just like, hey, and there's no rhyme or reason. So a lot of them are like, why are you giving it to me? It also forced like, we just want to say thank you. And so it became this, wow, that was kind of cool. Right. And in those moments where I want to take it is in those moments, what's that insight we can gain? How do we leverage that interaction quickly when the brain is open for a little bit, like, wow, I'm getting something. How do we take advantage of those things? Because that's how the brain can work. You open that spatial convenience for that brain to be aware. What do we take out or what do we put in that moment? Yeah. We're not there yet. Don't trust me. I'm not. But when I've talked to folks in the medical field, they're like, yeah, Julian, you're doing that. Again, they go down this very medical scientific thing. And I'm like, what you just said, O'Brien, I'm trying to simplify it.
Yeah.
I know I do all those other things. Is that going to become a leading indicator for my way I close business, or do I get higher ROI? Maybe, maybe not. Right. But what I do feel is that I validated somebody in a moment in time for something that is beyond like, hey, it's not always about the ROI financial. It's something nice. And is it really painful for me on the financial side? Not really. We're going to do it anyway, probably in a formal way, like every employee who's been here a month, we're going to give you this.
Yeah. Just take a little bit out of the merit pool and start giving it out in real time for nice things people do.
So what one supervisor did is took that opportunity and said, is there anything else I can get you? You know what one of them said? I don't get a chance to eat. So what did we do? We bought her a box of granola bars for her janitorial closet. You know how much my cost was? Like what, $12 for Costco?
Yeah. She was probably thrilled.
And by the way, she probably gave some away. She ate some. She takes some home. I didn't care. What I cared about is we listened to an employee. I gave the latitude of that supervisor to make a decision. And I'm empowering that frontline supervisor to listen on what you said and learn the customer and be able to do something about it.
Yeah.
We just did dignity-based management principle. Well, I don't think it's that hard, but you and I just did one.
Yeah.
How do you just operate it?
You just talked about, we just did one. So we're running out of time here. I could talk to you all day. I love what you're doing. What advice would you give to leaders on how to get started with this? Because you hear it in aggregate and it can be overwhelming. Where's the toe in the water? How do people start to do this in a way that can be sustainable over time? So it's not just a flash in the pan or they don't get overwhelmed.
I think that it goes back to the first concept. They have to have the will and they have to trust their instinct that they're doing something right. And I think it's testing and iterating with the agency or with what they are given. I don't think it's asking for anything new. I don't think that there is an HR person in the United States of America right now that's an HR generalist that doesn't have a tiny bit of latitude in any of the little things I said, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's testing and iterating and understanding. And here's the thing. I am sure they're already doing some of these things on a one-off basis. So for me, it's taking something you've probably already done, like your birthday celebrations, and thinking differently about, do they really want the cake? Maybe I just give them cash, right? And then formalizing it. Like, I'm trying this, within their little circle of influence, other HR executives or the CEO or whatever, and say, I'm going to try this. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Then you start to, okay, why don't we codify this as a true experiment, the company sponsored employee loan, right? Like it's got a little deeper, but it's testing and iterating small things. And then if it's a CEO, it's like, you got to ask yourself a bigger conversation, which is like, do I suffer from turnover? Do I suffer with recruitment and retention? If the answer is no, you're fantastic. That's awesome. If the answer is anywhere near remotely maybe or yes, I don't know if you're going to have a choice in the future. Yeah. It's not about the benefit of saying yes. It's the consequence of saying no. Like you're not going to have a choice. And so I think it's taking one or two of these little things, right? Like ask your CFO, why don't we pay our employees once a week? Well, it's more costly, is it? Well, I need another analyst to do the hours. Okay, well, how much does that cost? It's asking actually financial questions. Yeah. Well, we have to run another payroll, so that's more expensive. Well, I'm going to need a 20-hour-a-week person to do all the hours. Okay, how much is that? 30 grand? How much is it if two people lose their jobs and you got to have the tax the HR department to go do the RP, to go do this, to go do that, it's more than 30 grand or whatever that dollar amount is. Simple math. So I think it's that.
Yeah, if we could drop turnover 2%, does that help? Yeah.
Yeah. Or even 1 basis point.
Yeah.
And then you get to the next. So that's just triage to the bottom. Then you get to where I'm trying to go is how do you get someone from an hourly mindset to a salaried mindset? We won't have time in this podcast, but where we're going is really much more in the future of leveraging technology to prevent bad behavior and increase good behavior to stabilize that low wage worker. And then, I'm giving 6 months to figure that stuff out. But I think they already have it. Most HR people have it.
And that's a great point, is that this is a journey for you the way it is for anybody else. I talk a lot with our sales team. We talk a lot about process and building a process as a salesperson, and that's important. And I tend to be somebody who's very process driven. And so people will look at what I do and how I run my day to day, and they go, there's no way in hell I could ever do what you do. And my response is, don't even try, because I didn't build this in the beginning and then execute it for 15 years that I've been there. I've built this over 15 years. So the way I always think about it is start with, where are you having the most leakage? What's the biggest problem or the easiest problem that you can solve? And just solve that micro problem until it becomes routine and you don't even have to think about it anymore. And then find the next spot that you're leaking, whether you're leaking your own cognitive load, whether you're leaking stress, whether you're leaking profit, whether you're leaking people resigning out the door, like whatever that is, just one at a time, slowly over time. 5-10 years from now, your organization would be completely transformed if you did 2 changes a year for 5 years. I think we're so interested in jumping the line and putting the final product in place that we miss the real success of small changes over a long period of time.
Yeah, O'Brien. And I think that there is also, as a CEO, you have to recognize that the people doing that work are probably stressed out, right? Yeah. I mean, you have HR generalists and or CFOs that are spending it, you might have high paychecks, but they're stressed. So how do you create that culture where you're creating that ebb and flow to allow that iteration, right? So, I mean, I am talking about the frontline workers, but I have supervisors and managers that are still stressed out, right? And and then middle managers and senior managers. So that's the CEO's job, is like, listen, you're at the top. And even though you're stressed, like you have to find ways where you're allowing that same thing we want for the low wage worker on all levels of the organization. And that's over time. You're right. You're building a dignity-based management principle. I still have high revenue targets and gross margin targets and all that stuff, but we're not going to get there without people, at least in the businesses I have, right? Yeah. Technology is not going to solve all the problems, and AI won't either. So I'm with you. And I think it starts from the top, and getting coaching and getting partners that allow you to have plausible deniability. So if you get someone like you to say, oh yeah, I've seen this before, that HR person is going to have a little bit more confidence, because they're like, well, you heard those folks over there. They said this is a good thing. That's the other part of this that I think is important. Like I lean into, well, look, this big report from big academia says that this is a problem. Oh yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Or that allows like, oh, okay.
It's not me. Yes. This is the authority.
The authority is important.
Well, I appreciate the work that you're doing, because I think it is meaningful and impactful, and just want to wish you the best. And so definitely check out the work that they are doing. A lot of this is spelled out on their website, which we will link in the show notes, as well as everything else that we've talked about and some of the different vendors that Julian has named. So Julian, thank you, and best of luck with all this.
Well, Brian, again, just humbled to be on the show and appreciate all the work you're doing. And again, I hope that to some of your listeners, there's a nugget in this thing that you can take home and actually go do.
Oh, there was a whole mine full of nuggets in there to be harvested. So best of luck to everybody implementing this stuff in your businesses. Let's go make the world a little bit better. Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.